Imagine you're a 30-year-old philosopher. You've never held a sword in battle. You're standing in the middle of an enemy empire, 1,500 miles from home. Your generals have just been beheaded at what was supposed to be a peace conference. The army that brought you here is now hunting you. You have 10,000 men under you, and one night to figure out how to get them home alive. What do? In 401 BC, a man named Xenophon faced exactly this question, and what he discovered that night, the secret he used to lead an army across an entire empire, is the first principle in Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War. For most of our lives, we are taught to avoid conflict, to be agreeable, to get along with people, even when they don't deserve to get along with us. We grow up reading stories about cooperation and harmony, about the importance of fitting in, about how the rude and aggressive eventually pay a social price. And maybe that's true sometimes. But here's the problem with that picture. The world we actually live in, the workplace where someone is quietly working against your promotion, the family member who weaponizes guilt, the partner who undermines you with a smile, that world is not a peaceful place. That world is at war with us every single day, and we have been trained for the wrong fight. That is the world Robert Greene built his career describing, and the 33 Strategies of War is the most complete manual ever written for navigating it. Greene took everything humanity has learned about conflict, from Sun Tzu in ancient China, to Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants, to Napoleon's bloodless conquests, to Mao Zedong's Long March, and he distilled it into 33 principles. Principles that apply not just to battlefields, but to every difficult relationship and high-stakes situation you will ever face. This is part 1 of 3. Over the next 50 minutes, I'll walk you through the first 11 strategies, the foundation that everything else in the book is built on. We're going to move through 5 movements. First, how to find your enemies and how to let them fuel you instead of drain you. Second, how to master the one battlefield that decides every other battle, your own mind. Third, how to lead a team without being eaten alive by it. Fourth, how to choose which fights are worth your energy and which to walk away from. And fifth, how to become the kind of person no one even wants to attack in the first place. These are the strategies of self-defense, the strategies of inner war, the strategies of the disciplined mind. Without them, the more aggressive ideas in part 2 are wasted. With them, almost nothing can stop you. So let's go back to that night in 401 BC. Section 1. Wake up. Find your enemy. It was the spring of that year when Xenophon got the invitation. A friend was raising a Greek army of mercenaries to fight on behalf of Cyrus, the brother of the Persian king. Cyrus needed soldiers. He had rebellious cities to punish. The Greeks had a reputation as the best fighters in the known world, and they would take money from anyone willing to pay. Now Xenophon was not a soldier. He was a quiet country gentleman who lived just outside Athens. He raised dogs and horses. He spent his afternoons walking into town to talk philosophy with his friend Socrates. He was 30 years old, comfortable, well off, going nowhere in particular. But the offer was tempting. He'd never seen Persia. He'd never seen war. Maybe when it was all over, he'd write a book about it. So he consulted the oracle at Delphi, packed his things, and left. About 10,000 Greek mercenaries joined the expedition. They were a rough crew, there for the money, there for the adventure, not particularly loyal to anything except the next paycheck. A few months in, deep inside Persia, Cyrus finally admitted what he was actually doing. He wasn't punishing rebellious cities. He was marching on the capital. He was trying to overthrow his own brother and seize the Persian throne. The Greeks were furious. They argued, they complained, but Cyrus offered them more money, and the complaining stopped. The two armies met on the plains of Cunaxa. The battle was over almost before it started. Cyrus charged into the fight, was struck down, and died on the field. Just like that, the war the Greeks had been hired to fight no longer existed. Their employer was dead. They were 10,000 armed foreigners in the middle of an enemy empire, 1,500 miles from home. Now here's where the story gets dark. The Persian king sent word that he had no quarrel with the Greeks. They could go home. He would even send his commander, a man named Tissaphernes, to escort them safely. So the Greek officers met with the Persians under a flag of truce. They exchanged niceties. They agreed to talks. When the Greek commanders showed up to the meeting, the Persians surrounded them and beheaded every last one of them on the spot. One man escaped to bring the news back to camp. And what he found when he got there was a Greek army that had already given up. Some of the soldiers were drunk. Some were arguing. Some had slumped to the ground in despair. A few were quietly preparing to flee on their own. They had no leaders. They had no plan. They had no idea even which direction home was. Their only choices, as they saw them, were to surrender or to die. Xenophon was somewhere in that camp, and that night, he had a strange dream. A lightning bolt from Zeus struck his father's house and set it on fire. He woke up in a sweat, and in that moment, between the dream and the dawn, something clicked for him. He suddenly understood the real problem the Greeks were facing. It wasn't the mountains between them and Greece. It wasn't the rivers they'd have to cross. It wasn't even the Persian army that was hunting them. The real problem was inside their own heads. These were mercenaries. They had no cause to fight for. They had no real purpose. They had been hired to do a job, and the job was over. So now they sat around feeling sorry for themselves, with no idea why they were even still in Persia. They had forgotten, or maybe they had never really known who their enemy was. Xenophon decided he was going to be the lightning bolt from his dream. He called the surviving officers to a meeting, and what he said to them changed everything. "We are not going to negotiate," he told them. "We are not going to plead. We are going to declare war on the Persians. Total, unrelenting war. And from this moment on, every ounce of energy we have is going into one single goal: getting home alive. Anyone who tries to talk us into compromise is too cowardly to be one of us, and we will drive him out. We are Greeks. They are the murderers who beheaded our friends under a flag of truce. We are not the same. We are opposites. We are going to act like it." The next morning, when a Persian envoy showed up offering to mediate, the Greeks rudely sent him away. It was war. They burned their own wagons to lighten the load. They started moving at night. They lived off the land. They beat the Persians to a key mountain pass and slipped through it before the enemy could catch them. And over the next several years, through hostile territory, brutal winters, and treacherous mountain ranges, almost every one of those 10,000 men got home alive. Now think about what actually happened that night. Nothing changed about the Persian army. Nothing changed about the distance to Greece. Nothing changed about how outnumbered the Greeks were. The only thing that changed was inside their own minds. They went from being a confused, divided, despairing crowd to being a focused, unified, dangerous army. And the thing that changed them was identifying their enemy. Why does this work? Why is naming an enemy so powerful? Greene calls this the polarity strategy, and the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. Human beings are wired to react to opposition. Just like the opposite poles of a magnet create motion, your enemies create direction. They tell you what you are not. They tell you what you stand against. They give you something to push against, which means they give you something to push toward. Without an enemy, you drift. Your energy has nowhere to go. You spend your life trying to please everyone, fitting in, being agreeable, and slowly, without realizing it, you forget what you actually want. The problem is that most of us have been trained to avoid this. We are taught from childhood that having enemies is mean or petty or unspiritual. We are taught to forgive, to turn the other cheek, to assume the best in everyone, and those are beautiful ideas. But here's the truth Greene wants you to face. Your enemies exist, whether you acknowledge them or not. The co-worker who quietly takes credit for your work, the friend who subtly puts you down in front of others, the relative who guilts you into decisions you never wanted to make. They are at war with you already. The only question is whether you've noticed. The polarity strategy is not about hating people. It's not about going through life angry. It's about clarity. It's about looking at the people in your life and being honest about who is actually on your side and who is not. It's about giving yourself permission, quiet permission in your own mind, to stop trying to win over the unwinnable, to stop wasting energy on people who will never give you what you want, to stop apologizing for taking up space. Once you do this, something interesting happens. The fog lifts. You suddenly know what you're fighting for because you finally know what you're fighting against. Your energy concentrates. Your decisions get faster. The compromises that used to drain you start to feel obvious. Like Xenophon's army, you stop being a confused crowd. You become an army of one, focused, unified, dangerous. So here's the question. Who are the people in your life who are quietly costing you? Not the loud, obvious enemies, the subtle ones. The ones who smile while they undermine you. You don't need to confront them. You don't need to start fights. You just need to see them clearly, to stop pretending they're on your side, to privately, in your own mind, declare war. Because once you can do that, once you can name your enemies clearly, you've taken the first and most important step in becoming a strategist. Everything else in this book is built on it. But identifying your enemies on the outside is the easy part. The hardest battle most of us will ever fight is not against another person. It's against the version of ourselves that gets in our own way. Section 2. Master your own mind. In the year 1605, in a forest just outside Kyoto, a 21-year-old samurai named Miyamoto Musashi was walking to a duel that he was supposed to lose. By that point, Musashi had already become famous. He had killed dozens of opponents in formal duels, men far older and more experienced than he was. And earlier that year, he had defeated a man named Genzaemon, the head of the Yoshioka family, one of the most respected sword-fighting clans in all of Japan. A few days later, he had killed Genzaemon's brother in a second duel. The Yoshiokas wanted revenge, so they sent the youngest of their family, a boy named Matashichiro, to challenge Musashi to a final fight. Musashi's friends could see the trap immediately. The Yoshiokas would not be sending a boy to fight a master alone. They were planning an ambush. Now, here is where most fighters would have done one of two things. They would have refused to show up, or they would have brought friends of their own. Musashi did neither. He went alone, but he did one thing differently. In all of his previous duels, Musashi had a famous habit. He showed up hours late. He would let his opponents stew in their nerves, get tired, lose focus. It had become his trademark, so the Yoshiokas, knowing this, set their ambush late in the day. They lay down in the tall grass near the dueling ground and waited. Musashi arrived early, hours early. He hid in a tree. When the Yoshioka men finally took their positions, lounging in the grass, sure that their target was running late as always, Musashi dropped from the tree, drew his sword, and killed the boy Matashichiro before anyone realized what was happening. Then he positioned himself at a strange angle, not facing his enemies head-on, but slightly off to the side. The other men jumped to their feet, but instead of surrounding him, they had to charge at him in a broken line. He cut them down one by one as they came. A few years later, Musashi heard about another famous warrior, a man named Baiken who fought with a sickle and a long chain weighted with a steel ball. The weapon was thought to be unbeatable. Baiken would swing the ball in the air, building momentum, and force his opponent backward. Then he would hurl the ball at the man's face. While the opponent dealt with a chain, Baiken would slash forward with a sickle and open his throat. Nobody had ever survived a duel with Baiken. Musashi's friends again told him not to go. Musashi went anyway, but this time he showed up with two swords, one long, one short. Baiken had never fought a man with two swords. Then, instead of waiting for Bacon to start his trademark swing, Musashi charged at him. Bacon couldn't throw the ball, Musashi could parry with one sword and stab with the other. As Bacon hesitated, Musashi knocked him off balance with the short sword, and then drove the long sword through his chest. And then there was the last duel, the biggest one, against a samurai named Sasaki Ganyu, who fought with a long, beautiful, almost mythical sword. The duel was set on a small island. Half of Japan had heard about it. The morning of the fight, the island was packed with spectators. Ganyu arrived on time. He waited. An hour passed. 2 hours. He was furious. Finally, far in the distance, a small boat appeared. As it drifted closer, the spectators could see a man lying down inside it, half asleep, lazily carving something with a knife. It was Musashi. He was carving an oar, a long wooden boat oar, into the rough shape of a sword. He stepped out of the boat with a dirty rag tied around his head and the wooden oar in his hand. He looked, for all the world, like a man who had wandered into the wrong fight by accident. Ganryu shouted at him, "Are you so frightened that you've broken your promise?" Musashi said nothing. He just stepped closer. Ganryu, in fury, drew his beautiful sword and threw the empty sheath onto the sand. Musashi smiled. "Sasaki," he said quietly, "you have just sealed your doom." What victor on earth would throw away his sheath? Then he charged. He aimed the carved oar straight at Ganryu's eyes. Ganryu raised his beautiful sword to block, but he had never fought against a wooden weapon, and his timing was wrong. His sword cut nothing but the dirty rag around Musashi's head. In the same instant, Musashi brought down the oar and struck Ganryu in the skull. Ganryu died on the sand beside his abandoned sheath. Now take a step back and look at those 3 duels. Notice anything? Musashi never fought the same way twice. With Matashi Chiro, he showed up early instead of late, because the Yoshiokas were prepared for late. With Baiken, he used 2 swords because the chain and sickle was designed for a man fighting with one. With Ganryu, he used a wooden oar carved longer than any blade, because Ganryu had built his entire life around the perfection of his sword. Every fight, Musashi adapted. Every fight, he refused to use the strategy that had worked in his last fight. He fought what was actually in front of him, not what he remembered. This is Greene's second strategy. He calls it the guerrilla war of the mind, and the principle behind it is simple, but almost nobody actually lives by it. The thing that holds most of us back in life is not what's happening in front of us. It's what already happened to us. We get hurt by someone, and 10 years later, we're still defending against that hurt, even though the person who caused it is long gone. We try something at 25, and it doesn't work. And at 45, we still won't try anything like it again, even though we are completely different people now, with completely different resources. We carry our defeats like armor. We rehearse our old failures like a script, and we mistake all of that for wisdom. But what is wisdom really? It's not memorizing what happened before. It's looking at what's happening now clearly and responding to that. The general who keeps fighting his last war loses his next one. The boxer who keeps training for his last opponent gets knocked out by his next. The same is true for you. The strategy that got you through your 20s is not going to work in your 30s. The way you handled your last relationship is not going to fix the next one. The skills that earned you your current job will not get you the one above it. You have to wage guerrilla war on your own mind. You have to be ruthless about cutting off the patterns that no longer fit. When something stops working, even if it worked yesterday, you stop using it. You force yourself to come at the new situation fresh. You stay fluid. You stay mobile. You refuse to let yesterday's victory become today's habit. And here's the deepest part of this idea. The past is not just a memory. The past is a story you keep telling yourself about who you are. I'm not a confident person. I'm bad at relationships. I've always struggled with money. I'm the kind of person who gives up. Those stories may have been true once. They are not laws of nature. They are old wars you keep fighting in your head, and as long as you keep fighting them, you cannot see what's actually possible right now in this moment. So ask yourself, honestly, what old story are you carrying that's costing you? What pattern from your past keeps replaying in your present? What's the version of yourself you've outgrown that you're still pretending to be? Whatever it is, you have to be willing to leave it behind. Not because the past doesn't matter, but because every battle in your life is happening now, and the only mind capable of winning it is the one that's actually paying attention to it. Which brings us to the third strategy, and this one is harder than the second, because it's about what you do when everything is going wrong at the same time. In the year 1801, the British Navy was facing a crisis. A coalition of northern European nations, led by Denmark, had teamed up with France against Britain. The British government decided to break the coalition by sending a fleet to attack Copenhagen. They put a careful, methodical man named Sir Hyde Parker in command. Under him, as second in command, they sent the most aggressive admiral in the Navy, a small, scrappy man with one eye and one arm, named Horatio Nelson. On the morning of the attack, Nelson led the assault into Copenhagen harbor. The Danes had their ships chained together along the coast and were firing back at point-blank range. Within an hour, the British fleet was taking heavy damage. Cannonballs were tearing through the masts. Men were dying on the decks. Sir Hyde Parker, watching the carnage from a distance, decided to call off the attack. He raised signal flag number 39 on his ship, the order to withdraw. The signal would be passed down the line, ship by ship, and the battle would end. Aboard Nelson's ship, a junior officer ran up to him with the news. "Sir, the admiral has signaled to withdraw." Nelson kept walking the deck. He didn't even look up. He asked the officer, "Is my own signal still flying?" His own signal was number 16. "Engage the enemy more closely." The officer confirmed it. Nelson said, "Mind you keep it so." A minute later, Nelson turned to his flag captain and said something that became one of the most famous lines in military history. He raised his telescope to his blind eye, and he said, very calmly, "You know, I have only one eye. I have a right to be blind sometimes." He held the telescope to his blind eye, looked toward Parker's ship, and said, "I really do not see the signal." He kept fighting. The other British captains, watching, had to choose between obeying Parker and obeying Nelson, and they chose Nelson. Within an hour, the Danish defenses began to crack. The chained ships started surrendering one by one. By the end of the day, Denmark had agreed to a ceasefire. Nelson had won the battle that his commander had ordered him to abandon. Now here's what's important about this story. Nelson was not reckless. He had spent weeks before the battle studying the maps, the winds, the depths of the harbor, the position of every Danish gun. He knew, when the chaos started, that the Danes were closer to breaking than they looked. What Sir Hyde Parker saw was a battle going wrong. What Nelson saw was a battle about to be won. The difference between them was not skill. It was something Greene calls presence of mind. When everything around you is falling apart, when emotions are screaming, when the people next to you are panicking, there is a part of your mind that wants to spin out with them. It wants to react. It wants to flinch. It wants to retreat to whatever feels safe. And almost everyone gives in to that part. The ones who don't, the ones who can stay calm in the storm, those are the ones who win. But notice what presence of mind actually is. It is not detachment. Nelson was not standing on the deck pretending he didn't care. His pulse was racing. His ship was getting hit. Men were dying around him. He felt all of it, but he had trained himself over years of battle to feel all of it without letting it dictate what he did next. His mind kept working. His judgment stayed clear, while Parker, miles away in safety, fell apart from his fear of failure. Nelson, in the middle of the inferno, kept thinking, how do you build that? How do you become someone who stays calm when everyone else loses it? You can't fake it. You can't think your way into it. The only way to develop presence of mind is the way Nelson developed it, through exposure, through deliberately putting yourself in difficult situations and learning slowly that you can survive them. The mind that has never been tested cannot be trusted. The mind that has been tested 100 times stops being afraid. So when chaos comes, and it will, try not to react in the first 30 seconds. Try to be the person in the room who is still thinking when everyone else is feeling. Notice what's actually happening. Notice what's actually true. Notice what your fear is telling you to do, and then ask whether your fear has ever, in your entire life, given you good advice. The fourth strategy is the answer to a different problem. Not what to do when chaos hits, but what to do when nothing seems urgent enough to make you move at all. We're going to fast forward almost 300 years, from Copenhagen in 1801, all the way back to a beach in Mexico in the year 1519. His name was Hernán Cortés. He was 34 years old, a Spanish soldier with no particular distinction, who had spent the last decade slowly climbing the colonial ladder in Cuba. But Cortés had heard the rumors about a place called Mexico, a vast highland empire ruled by a people called the Aztecs, with a capital city built on a lake, and more gold than anyone in Europe had ever imagined. And from the moment he heard those rumors, Cortés had only one thought: he was going to conquer it. In 1518, the governor of Cuba finally gave Cortés command of an exploration mission, 11 ships, 500 men. The mission was supposed to be cautious, find out what was there, plant the Spanish flag, come home. But the governor became suspicious that Cortés was planning something bigger. He sent word that Cortés was no longer in command. Cortés got the message and slipped out of Havana harbor in the middle of the night before the order could reach him. His ships landed on the east coast of Mexico. In the spring of 1519, he founded a town called Veracruz. He sent envoys inland. He met a few of the local tribes who hated the Aztecs and were willing to ally with him, and he started writing letters back to Spain, explaining that he was about to conquer an empire of millions of people with 500 Spaniards. The problem was that not all 500 Spaniards wanted to be conquerors. Some of them had been planted on the expedition as spies for the governor of Cuba. They started spreading rumors that Cortés was insane. Some of the regular soldiers, hearing the rumors, started to agree. Why would any rational man march 500 soldiers on foot against 500,000 Aztec warriors who ate their prisoners and wore their skins as trophies? Why not take the gold they had already collected, sail back to Cuba, enjoy a comfortable life, and let some other fool die in the highlands? On the night of July 30th, 1519, Cortés was woken up by a Spanish sailor begging for mercy. The sailor confessed that a group of soldiers had organized a plan. That very night, they were going to seize one of the 11 ships, sail back to Cuba, and tell the governor everything. They were going to abandon Cortés and the conquest with him. Cortés, lying awake in the dark, understood something. The plot was not really the problem. The plot was a symptom. The real problem was that his men had a way out. They had 11 ships sitting in the harbor. 11 beautiful, sturdy, ocean-worthy reasons to give up the moment things got hard. And as long as those ships were there, every soldier in his command was secretly thinking about Cuba, their families, their farms, their warm beds. They were not really committed to Mexico because they did not have to be. So Cortés made a decision. He hanged the 2 ringleaders of the plot the next morning, and then he did something far stranger. He privately summoned his ship pilots and bribed them. He told them to drill holes in the bottoms of every ship in the fleet, then to come to him publicly, with shocked faces, and announce that worms had eaten through the holes. The pilots did as they were told. The first 5 ships took on water and sank. The Spanish soldiers shrugged. Worms in the wood happened, especially in tropical waters. Then a few days later, 3 more ships went down. The men started to murmur. Then 2 more. Now they were furious. They could see what was happening. When Cortés called his army together, the mood was murderous. There was one ship left in the harbor. 500 men were ready to mutiny. Cortés stood in front of them, and he didn't lie. He admitted everything. Yes, he said, I sank the ships. I had to. We are surrounded by enemies. We are divided. Half of you would have run by now if you had the chance. And we cannot conquer an empire that way. So the choice is simple. You can hang me right now on this beach and then sit here until the Aztecs come and finish you off. Or you can follow me to Tenochtitlan, because there is no Cuba anymore. There is no going back. The only way home is forward, through the heart of the empire. And if we fight like men who have nothing to lose, we will become the lords of Mexico. He pointed to the last ship still floating in the harbor. Anyone who didn't have the stomach for the fight, he said, could sail it home. No one took him up on the offer. The last ship was run aground that afternoon. 2 years later, after one of the most brutal military campaigns in human history, Hernán Cortés stood on the ruins of Tenochtitlan as the ruler of Mexico. Now this story is famous. You've probably heard pieces of it before. But the lesson Greene wants you to take from it is not what you think. It's not about cruelty. It's not about a leader manipulating his men. It's about something Greene calls death ground. And it's actually one of the deepest insights in the entire book. Here's the question. Why did Cortés have to sink his own ships? Why couldn't he just give a great speech, fire up his men, promise them gold, and march on the Aztec capital that way? Because human beings, all human beings, you and me included, do not give 100% of themselves to anything we have a way out of. As long as your back has somewhere to go, your front will not push as hard. As long as you have a backup plan, you will quietly ration your effort. As long as failure is survivable, your effort will be survivable too. Think about your own life for a second. Think about the projects you've started and never finished, the diets, the new businesses, the relationships you tried to save with one foot already out the door, the hard conversations you put off because something else was always more comfortable. What do all of those have in common? They all had ships in the harbor. They all had escape routes. And as long as the escape route was there, you never really committed. Cortés understood this about people because he understood it about himself. He knew his men would not fight an empire if there was a Cuba to sail home to. So he removed Cuba from the equation. He didn't motivate them with a speech. He motivated them with a situation in which they had no other option except to fight like hell. You don't have to be Cortés to use this strategy. You don't have to literally burn anything down. But you do have to ask yourself a question that most people are afraid to ask. What is the ship in your harbor right now? What is the soft escape route that's quietly draining your effort? Maybe it's the safe job you keep telling yourself you'll quit soon. Maybe it's the savings cushion that lets you avoid the conversation about what you actually want to do with your life. Maybe it's the relationship you stay in because being alone feels harder than being unhappy. Whatever it is, as long as it's there, you are not going to give 100% to the alternative. You can't. Your mind will not let you. The death ground strategy is not about being reckless. It's about being honest. Honest enough to recognize that comfort is a kind of slow poison. That your second option is quietly killing your first one. That you will not become the person you could be until you make the version of yourself that you used to be impossible to return to. You have to sink your own ships. Otherwise, you'll spend your life staring at the empire you were supposed to conquer and quietly planning your trip back to Cuba. That is the inner war. Identifying your enemies, refusing to fight your last battle, keeping your head when everyone else is losing theirs, and cutting off the escape route that's keeping you small. Master those four, and you have already done what most people never do in their entire lives. But mastering yourself is only the first front, because in almost every battle that actually matters, you are not fighting alone. Let's get brutally honest for a moment. Most of us are not commanders of armies. We don't have generals or troops or marshals, but every one of us, at some point in our lives, finds ourselves in charge of something. A team at work, a family, a small business with 3 employees, a Sunday dinner with 12 relatives, and the moment we are in charge, the moment other people start depending on us, the strategies that worked when we were fighting alone stop working. Because here is what they don't tell you about leadership. The hardest part of leading other people is not the people. It is yourself. Section 3. Build your army. In the summer of 1915, on a small Turkish peninsula called Gallipoli, 20,000 British soldiers were about to learn this lesson the hard way. The British had been stuck for months, trying and failing to break through Turkish lines and seize Constantinople, hoping to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the First World War. The campaign had stalled. Thousands of men had already died for nothing, so the British commander, a thoughtful and well-respected general named Sir Ian Hamilton, decided to break the deadlock with a surprise attack. The plan was elegant. 20,000 fresh troops would land at a quiet bay called Suvla, 4 miles north of the existing front line. Once ashore, they would race inland to a range of hills called Teke Tepe, a position that, if held, would let the British dominate the entire peninsula. The Turks had only a handful of soldiers in the area. The race for the hills was supposed to be over before the enemy even noticed. Hamilton was a refined, gentlemanly officer. He didn't bark orders, he didn't issue threats. He was the kind of commander who told his subordinates the goal of an operation and trusted them to figure out how to get there. And the man he had to put in charge of this landing was a 61-year-old officer named Sir Frederick Stopford, a man who had never led troops in battle, was in poor health, and saw artillery as the only real way to win a fight. Below Stopford was Major General Frederick Hammersley, a man who had suffered a complete nervous breakdown the year before. Why did Hamilton send men like this on such an important mission? Because they were the most senior officers available. Seniority in the British Army of 1915 mattered more than competence, so Hamilton did the polite English thing. He gave Stopford a vague but firm-sounding order: secure Teke Tepe, and trusted him to handle it. He did not specify a time frame. He did not say as soon as possible. He did not say before the Turks reinforce. He just said, take the hills. On the morning of August 7th, the landing began. The Turks were caught completely by surprise. The British walked ashore against almost no resistance. The path to Teke Tepe was wide open, a 4-mile march across flat, undefended ground. But something strange started happening. The colonels on the beach didn't know what they were supposed to do next. They sent runners back to General Hammersley asking for orders. Hammersley sent runners to Stopford asking what to tell them. Stopford was on a boat offshore, sipping tea, taking his time, and the order, by the time it came back through the chain of command, had quietly changed. Secure Teke Tepe had become advance to Teke Tepe if possible, and by the time it reached the colonels in the field, if possible, had become rest the men, consolidate the beach, advance tomorrow. So 20,000 British soldiers, armed, supplied, with nothing standing between them and the most important strategic position in the entire campaign, sat down on the beach. Some of them swam in the bay, some of them napped. Officers had picnics. When Hamilton flew in by reconnaissance plane the next morning, he could not believe what he was seeing. He found Stopford on his boat, congratulating himself on a successful landing. He found Hammersley supervising the construction of his temporary headquarters tent. He found his entire army lounging on the sand like it was a bank holiday. Hamilton, with all his English politeness gone, ordered Hammersley to send a brigade up to Teke Tepe immediately. It would have to be a forced night march. They had to take the hills before dawn. At sunrise on August 9th, Hamilton watched through his binoculars as the British troops, exhausted from their hasty march, climbed the slopes of Teke Tepe, and he watched in horror as a Turkish division, having marched through the night themselves, appeared on the ridge 30 minutes before them. The Turks had reached the hills first. The British were driven back to the beach. The Gallipoli campaign was lost. Now think about what happened. Hamilton had a winning plan. He had the men. He had the surprise. He had a 4-mile head start over an enemy that wasn't even there yet. He still lost. Why? Because his orders, once they entered the chain of command, dissolved. The clarity at the top turned into vagueness in the middle and paralysis at the bottom. Each link in the chain was just a little less urgent, a little less courageous, a little less willing to make a decision than the link above it. By the time the order reached the men who actually had to execute it, there was no force left in it at all. This is what Greene calls the command and control problem. And it is not a problem that only generals face. You face it every time you ask someone to do something for you. You face it every time you delegate. You face it every time you assume that a clear request from you will land as a clear request when it gets to the person who actually has to do the work. It almost never does. There is friction at every layer. There is interpretation at every step. The signal you sent is not the signal that gets received. The chain of command is not an accident. It is your creation. If you tolerate vagueness, you will get vagueness back. If you tolerate fear, you will get hesitation back. If you don't adapt your style to the weakness of the people below you, if you assume they will rise to your level rather than sink to theirs, you will lose battles you have already won on paper. 20,000 men sat on a beach because their commander didn't realize that "take the hills" needed to be said with urgency. Don't make the same mistake. But there's a flip side to this story. Sometimes the problem isn't that you have too little control over your people. Sometimes the problem is that you're trying to control them too much. In the autumn of 1805, an Austrian general named Karl Mack stood inside the fortified town of Ulm, deep in the heart of Bavaria, with 70,000 troops and a plan he was very, very proud of. The plan had taken months to write. Austria, England, and Russia had teamed up against Napoleon. Together they had assembled the largest military force Europe had ever seen, 500,000 men. Mack's job was to march the Austrian half of this army into Bavaria, dig in at Ulm, and wait for the Russians to arrive from the east. Once the two armies linked up, they would crush France together. Napoleon, with only 70,000 French soldiers spread out across the continent, could not possibly stop them. Mack hated chaos. He hated improvisation. He believed in what he called clockwork warfare. Every unit in its place, every movement calculated, every contingency planned for in advance. He had spent 3 years as a French prisoner studying Napoleon's tactics, and he believed he had finally figured out how to beat him. What he didn't know was that while he was perfecting his plan, Napoleon had quietly reinvented warfare itself. For thousands of years, armies had fought as one giant unified mass. The general led from the center. Everyone moved in the same direction at the same time. To split your forces was considered amateurish. It made you weaker, more vulnerable, harder to control. Napoleon threw all of that out. He divided his army into smaller units he called corps. Each corps had its own infantry, its own cavalry, its own artillery, its own commanders. Each was led by a marshal, a young, proven officer who could think for himself. Each was a miniature army. Napoleon's instructions to his marshals were unusually simple. He told them the mission, he told them the objective, and then he stepped back. He let them figure out how to get there. He didn't micromanage, he didn't second guess. The corps moved separately by different routes, sometimes hundreds of miles apart, but always close enough that they could converge fast when needed. To the enemy, this looked like chaos. Reports would come in from one place saying the French were attacking, reports from another place saying the French were attacking somewhere else entirely. To Mack, sitting in Ulm with his perfect plan, those reports made no sense. In late September, scouts told Mack the French were coming through the Black Forest west of him. Mack sent troops to block them. A few days later, scouts told him there was a French army to the north, maybe 60 miles away, then maybe 40, then maybe near the Danube. The reports contradicted each other. He pulled his troops back to Ulm to consolidate. By the time he understood what was actually happening, it was too late. One French corps had crossed the Danube to the east, cutting him off from the Russians. Another had appeared to the south, blocking his escape into Italy. A third was coming straight at Ulm from the west. On October 20th, 1805, Karl Mack surrendered. 60,000 Austrian troops became prisoners of war without firing a meaningful shot. It was, as one historian called it, the most splendidly bloodless victory in history. Mack spent the rest of his life in prison, trying to figure out what had happened. Some said he lost his mind doing it. The lesson here is the opposite of the Gallipoli lesson, but they are two halves of the same truth. Hamilton lost because his chain of command was too loose, too vague. Mack lost because his plan was too tight, too rigid. The world moved too fast for clockwork. Napoleon won because his marshals didn't have to wait for orders. They knew the mission, and they made decisions on the ground. So when you lead, whether it's an army or a team of 3, you have to walk a strange line. Be specific about what you want. Don't be vague like Hamilton, but trust the people under you to figure out how to deliver it. Don't try to control every move like Mack. The leaders who succeed give their people clarity of purpose and freedom of method. The leaders who fail reverse it, vague about the goal, controlling about the steps. But all of this, chains of command, division of forces, clarity of purpose, assumes one very big thing. It assumes the people under you actually want to fight in the first place. In the early 1630s, in the English countryside, a 30-year-old gentleman farmer named Oliver Cromwell was failing at his life. His farm wasn't doing well. His political career had gone nowhere. He was in the grip of a deep depression, the kind that brought constant thoughts of death. He felt like he was wasting away on a small piece of land in the middle of nowhere, watching his children grow up while he became less and less of a man every year. And then in the middle of his crisis, Cromwell had a religious conversion. He became a devout Puritan. He came to believe that everything in his life, including the failures, including the depression, had been part of God's design for him. He believed God had a purpose for him. He didn't yet know what it was, but for the first time in years, he was no longer drifting. A few years later, civil war broke out in England. King Charles I had pushed Parliament too far. The country split. Parliament raised an army. Cromwell, by now in his early 40s, joined as a captain of cavalry. What he saw in the parliamentary army horrified him. The soldiers were paid mercenaries, drunkards mostly, men with no skin in the game. They fought when ordered. They ran when scared. They were not bad men. They were just hired men. And against the king's professional cavalry, knights and aristocrats fighting for honor and country, they kept losing. Cromwell saw something nobody else seemed to see. The problem with Parliament's army was not its weapons. It was not its training. It was its soul. The men had no reason to fight, so he started recruiting differently. He went into the small Puritan villages of East Anglia. He looked for men who were already serious, already disciplined, already convinced that they were doing God's work in the world. He didn't pay them more. He demanded more from them. He told them they were not just fighting a king. They were fighting for the soul of England. He told them their cause was holy. Within a few years, Cromwell had built what came to be called the New Model Army, and at the heart of it was his cavalry, the famous Ironsides. They drilled harder than any other unit in England. They prayed before battle. They sang hymns as they charged, and they did not lose, not once, not in a single engagement. When the war was over, Parliament had won. The king was executed. England was reshaped forever, and the man who made it possible was a depressed gentleman farmer who, a decade earlier, had nothing going for him at all, except a cause he believed in. This is Greene's 7th strategy. He calls it the Crusade, and the principle behind it is the deepest truth about leading other people. You cannot motivate human beings with money alone. You cannot motivate them with fear alone. You cannot motivate them with logic alone. The only thing that pulls genuine, sustained, unstoppable effort out of people is a sense of meaning, a sense that what they're doing matters, a sense that they are part of something bigger than themselves. If you lead a team, any team, your most important job is not strategy. It is not budgeting. It is not even hiring. Your most important job is making the people around you feel that what they are doing is real, that their contribution matters, that they are part of a story worth telling. If you can do that, they will work harder than they ever knew they could. If you can't, if your team is just a paycheck and a Slack channel and a Tuesday meeting, you will lose every important battle to the team across the street, whose people actually believe in what they're doing. An army with a cause beats an army with money every single time. Cromwell knew it. Xenophon knew it. Every great leader in history has known it. The only question is whether you know it about whatever team you're leading right now. So we've talked about the inner war and the war you fight as a leader. But there's another kind of war, and it's the one that wears most people down. It's the war of constant skirmishes, the war of small battles that aren't really worth fighting, the war of people who pull you into conflicts that drain you and lead nowhere. Strategy is not just about how to win the fight. It is also about knowing which fights to walk away from in the first place. So we move into the third front of the inner war, the war of choosing what's worth fighting for at all. And it begins with one of the saddest stories in military history, the story of a king who won every battle he fought and lost his kingdom anyway. Section 4. Choose your battles. In the year 281 BC, a small wealthy city in southern Italy called Tarentum found itself at war with Rome. The Tarentines had insulted Roman ambassadors. They had sunk a few Roman ships, and now the Roman legions were coming for them. The problem was that the Tarentines didn't actually have an army. They were a wealthy trading city, soft from generations of easy living, and they had let their military skills atrophy. So they did what wealthy cities always do when they need a fight won for them. They hired someone. The man they hired was named Pyrrhus. He was the king of a small Greek kingdom called Epirus, and he was, at that moment, the most feared warrior in the Mediterranean world. He was a distant cousin of Alexander the Great, and he had spent his whole life trying to live up to that bloodline. He led every charge personally. He fought in the front line of every battle. His soldiers nicknamed him the Eagle. When Tarentum offered him gold and an army to lead against Rome, Pyrrhus didn't hesitate. He saw it as his chance to do what Alexander had done, to carve out an empire of his own. In the spring of 280 BC, Pyrrhus crossed the Adriatic with the largest Greek army ever sent to Italy. 20,000 foot soldiers, 3,000 cavalry, 2,000 archers, and his secret weapon, 20 war elephants. When he met the Roman legions for the first time near a town called Heraclea, the battle started badly for him. The Romans were better disciplined than he had expected. His Greek army was nearly broken, so Pyrrhus unleashed his elephants. The Romans had never seen elephants before. They had never imagined them. The huge animals trumpeted and charged and trampled, and the Romans in panic scattered and ran. It was a victory. Pyrrhus had won. The whole Italian peninsula heard the news. Other cities sent him reinforcements. He looked for a moment like the next Alexander. But there was a problem. Pyrrhus had lost a lot of his best men in that battle. His elite officers, the men who had trained with him for years, were dead. The Roman legions, even in defeat, had fought harder than any army he had ever faced, and he could see on the horizon that more Romans were coming. He tried to negotiate. He offered the Romans a fair settlement. They refused. So a year later, the two armies met again, near a town called Asculum. It was a brutal 2-day fight. On the first day, the Romans seemed to have the upper hand. On the second day, Pyrrhus managed to maneuver them onto bad terrain and personally led another elephant charge into the heart of their lines. The Romans broke again. Pyrrhus had won his second great battle. He had defeated the most disciplined army in the world twice in 2 years. By every measure, he was the conqueror of Italy. But after the battle, when his officers came to congratulate him, Pyrrhus said something that has echoed through history for over 2,000 years. He looked around at the field, at the bodies of his best men, at the wreckage of his elite cavalry, at the elephants that had been killed, and he said very quietly, "If we win one more battle like this, we are completely ruined." He was right. After Asculum, Pyrrhus had no army left. His best generals were dead. His veterans were dead. The Tarentines, the people who had hired him, had still failed to raise their own troops, so he had no replacements. Meanwhile, the Romans, even after losing 2 major battles, had endless reserves. They simply called up new recruits, formed new legions, and kept going. Within a few years, Pyrrhus had to abandon Italy entirely. He died not long after, killed in another reckless battle in Greece, fighting yet another war he didn't need to fight. This is where we get the phrase Pyrrhic victory. A victory that cost you so much, you would have been better off losing. Now the Pyrrhus story is famous, but Greene wants you to notice the part most people miss. The mistake wasn't a tactical mistake. It wasn't a battlefield mistake. The mistake was made years before, when Pyrrhus accepted a war that was never going to be worth what it cost him. He saw a glittering prize. He didn't think hard enough about the bill. He didn't ask himself the simple question that should be asked before any major fight. Even if I win, what does winning actually leave me with? This is Greene's 8th strategy, and he calls it the perfect economy. The idea is that your time, your energy, and your resources are not infinite. Every fight you take on uses some of them up. Every fight you win, even decisively, costs you something. So the wise strategist doesn't ask, "Can I win this fight?" The wise strategist asks, "Is this fight worth winning?" Because there are people in your life who would love to draw you into Pyrrhic battles, petty conflicts, comment section arguments, workplace dramas, family feuds that have been running for 30 years and will never resolve. You can win every single one of them, and at the end, like Pyrrhus, you will look around and realize you have nothing left. Most people are not undone by their losses. They are undone by the things they win that they never should have fought for in the first place. So before you commit to any major battle in your life, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what does winning actually look like? Not the fantasy version, the real version. Second, what does winning cost? Not just in money, but in time, in goodwill, in attention, in the energy you won't have for other things that matter more. Third, is the prize after all those costs still worth more than the prize would have been if you had simply walked away? If the answer to that last question isn't a clear yes, do what Pyrrhus refused to do. Walk away. Save your strength for a fight that actually pays. But there's a flip side to this, and it's just as important. Sometimes you can't avoid a fight. Sometimes the fight comes to you, and when it does, the question becomes a different one. Not, should I fight, but should I move first, or should I let them? In the autumn of 1805, the same year Karl Mack was surrendering at Ulm, Napoleon Bonaparte was about to face the most dangerous moment of his career. After his easy victory over the Austrians, he had pushed his army deep into Central Europe, chasing a retreating Russian general named Kutuzov. But the chase had gone badly. The weather turned brutal. His supply lines stretched too thin, and by the time Napoleon caught up, Kutuzov had reached the town of Olmütz, where he linked up with another Russian army, fresh Austrian reinforcements, and the young Tsar of Russia himself, Alexander I. The combined Allied force was now 90,000 men. Napoleon, scattered across hundreds of miles, had less than 50,000 men he could bring to a fight. To make matters worse, Prussia was watching. The Prussians had not yet entered the war, but they were considering it. If Napoleon showed weakness, they would jump in. His enemies in Britain were also waiting. If he stumbled, They might invade France itself. The pressure to act fast was crushing. His own generals begged him to retreat back toward France while he still could. Napoleon instead did something nobody expected. He started acting weak. He moved part of his army to a town called Austerlitz, halfway between Vienna and Olmütz. He took a strong defensive position on a series of hills called the Pratzen Heights, and then 2 days later he abandoned them. He pulled his troops back. He repositioned his cavalry over and over, as if he couldn't make up his mind. He requested an armistice. He sent an envoy to the Tsar's camp begging for talks. The envoy reported back that Napoleon had seemed nervous, distracted, almost panicked. The young Tsar Alexander was thrilled. He was 28 years old. He had never commanded a battle in his life. He had been waiting for years for his chance to be the man who finally beat Napoleon. And here was Napoleon, clearly rattled, clearly outnumbered, clearly making mistakes. His older Austrian advisors urged caution. The Tsar overruled them. He gave the order to attack. On the morning of December 2nd, 1805, the combined Russian-Austrian army did exactly what Napoleon had set them up to do. They poured down off the Pratzen Heights and aimed at his weak southern flank, the one Napoleon had deliberately left exposed. They were going to swing south, cut off his retreat, and surround him. It was the obvious move. It was the textbook move. It was the move Napoleon had spent the previous week begging them to make. As the Allied army committed itself, leaving the Pratzen Heights almost empty in their rush to the south, Napoleon released the trap. A massive French force he had hidden in the fog poured up the heights, retook them in less than 2 hours, and then drove straight east, through the gap the Allies had left wide open in their own center. By 11 o'clock that morning, the Russian-Austrian army was cut in 3. Their north was isolated, their center was being overrun, their south was being driven into the frozen lakes behind them, where thousands of men drowned trying to escape. By the end of the day, the Allies had been shattered, the coalition collapsed, the Tsar fled, the Austrian Emperor signed a humiliating peace. Austerlitz was the greatest victory of Napoleon's life, and he won it by appearing to lose. Now think about what just happened. Napoleon didn't attack first. He didn't move aggressively. He didn't strike before the enemy was ready. In fact, by every measure of conventional strategy, he should have. He had less time than they did. He had fewer men. His position was getting worse by the hour. Every general in Europe would have told him to attack at dawn, before the situation deteriorated further. But Napoleon understood something that the Tsar didn't. The first person to move in a fight reveals their strategy. The first person to move shows their cards. The first person to move loses the right to react. So Napoleon let the Tsar move first. He baited him. He gave him the perfect picture of a weak, panicking enemy and let him swing wildly at it. And the moment the Tsar committed himself, Napoleon hit him from the angle the Tsar had just opened up by attacking. This is the counterattack strategy, and it works because of something deep in human psychology. Most aggressive people are aggressive because they need to feel in control. They want to dictate the terms. They want to set the pace. They cannot stand sitting still, waiting, watching. So they attack, and the moment they attack, they expose themselves. They commit. They show you exactly where they are weak. In your own life, this means something simple. When you are dealing with someone who is hostile or pushy or trying to dominate you, your instinct will be to fight back hard and fast. Resist that instinct. The pushy person is usually weaker than they look because their aggression is itself a vulnerability. Let them swing first. Let them make the first move. Watch what they reveal about their priorities, their fears, their gaps. And then, when you understand them better than they understand themselves, hit back from the angle they didn't see coming. The first person to commit loses. The patient one wins. Napoleon knew this in his bones. The Tsar learned it on a frozen lake in Moravia, with the bodies of his soldiers floating around him. You don't have to learn it that way. You can choose, right now, to be the one who waits. So now we come to the last movement of part 1, The strategies we've talked about so far have been about how to fight better. The last two are different. They are about how to never have to fight at all. Section 5. Become untouchable. In the spring of 1862, less than a year after the start of the American Civil War, the Confederacy was in serious trouble. The South had lost a string of important battles. Its best generals were quarreling with each other. Recruiting had stalled, and worst of all, a massive Union army of more than 100,000 men, under the command of General George McClellan, was sailing toward the Virginia coast. McClellan's plan was to land near the coast, march inland, and capture Richmond, the Confederate capital. If he succeeded, the war would be over. The South would surrender. President Lincoln, in Washington, was so confident in McClellan's plan that he had promised to send another 40,000 Union troops as reinforcements. Those troops were stationed near the capital and were about to march south. Once they joined McClellan, the Confederates wouldn't stand a chance. Confederate generals knew this. They begged Richmond for help. There was no help to send. The South simply didn't have the men. Out in a remote corner of the war, the Shenandoah Valley, west of Washington, there was one Confederate force that might be able to do something. Not much of one. Maybe 17,000 men scattered across an area the size of a small country, led by an eccentric, obsessive Virginia Military Institute professor turned general named Thomas Jonathan Jackson. The men called him Stonewall. He was a strange man, pious, taciturn, given to praying on his knees in the middle of battles. He sucked on lemons constantly. He fell asleep at dinner tables. His own officers thought he might be slightly insane, but Stonewall Jackson had one quality that nobody else in the Confederate Army quite had. He marched his men faster than anyone believed possible. His soldiers covered 50 miles a day. They moved through mountains. They moved at night. They appeared in places nobody expected them to be. Now Jackson had no real chance of beating the Union forces in the valley head-on. They had 3 armies in the region, each one bigger than his. But he understood something the Union didn't. He didn't need to beat them. He just needed to scare them. So in the spring of 1862, with 17,000 men, Stonewall Jackson started a campaign of terror across the Shenandoah Valley. He hit one Union army hard, then disappeared into the mountains. He hit another from a direction nobody expected, then vanished. He attacked supply trains. He captured towns and abandoned them the next day. He marched 100 miles in 3 days. He was everywhere and nowhere. In Washington, Lincoln started getting reports that something was very wrong in the valley. There seemed to be a huge Confederate army there. Reports estimated 40,000 men, 60,000, 100,000. The truth was that Jackson never had more than 17,000. But moving that fast, hitting that hard, he made himself look like an army 4 times his actual size. Lincoln panicked. He thought Jackson was about to march on Washington itself. So he did the one thing the Confederacy desperately needed him to do. He canceled the order sending those 40,000 reinforcements to McClellan. He sent them to the Shenandoah Valley instead, to chase a ghost. McClellan, deprived of his reinforcements, stalled out in front of Richmond. The Confederate army managed to push him back. The capital was saved. The war went on for 3 more years, and the man who saved Richmond never fought a single battle for it. He just ran wild in a valley 200 miles away and made himself look terrifying. This is the deterrent strategy, and the principle behind it is one of the most useful ideas in this entire book. Most people think of strength as the ability to win a fight. Greene thinks of it differently. Real strength is the ability to make people not want to fight you in the first place. Stonewall Jackson never could have beaten the Union Army in a fair fight. He had a fraction of their men, a fraction of their supplies, a fraction of their weapons. But he made himself so unpredictable, so dangerous, so hard to read, that the Union refused to engage him. They tied up tens of thousands of soldiers chasing a man they could not catch. In your own life, the lesson is simple but profound. You don't need to win every fight you're invited into. You need to be the kind of person other people don't want to start fights with in the first place. Build a reputation for being a little unpredictable, a little harder to push around than you look. A person who doesn't make a big deal out of things, but who, when crossed, makes life unpleasant in ways that aren't always obvious. You don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to be cruel. You just have to make it clear, in small ways, that messing with you costs more than it pays. People will leave you alone. The ones who would have drained you with constant low-level conflict will, like the Union Army, decide it's easier to find someone else to bother. But there's one final strategy in part 1, and it's the one that takes the most courage to use, because it looks, from the outside, like weakness. It looks like surrender. It looks like giving up, and almost always, it's the smartest move on the board. In the year 1934, in the mountains of southern China, 100,000 exhausted communist soldiers were running for their lives. The Chinese Civil War had been going on for years, and the communists were losing badly. The nationalist army of Chiang Kai-shek had encircled them. German military advisors had taught the nationalists how to choke off the communist strongholds, slowly, one at a time. Cities were falling. Soldiers were deserting. The cause looked finished. The man who should have been leading the communists in this crisis was a former farmer named Mao Zedong. Mao had been the most successful communist commander in the early years of the war. He had pioneered guerrilla warfare in China. He had won battles when nobody else could. But the communist leadership at the time was dominated by a faction of Soviet-educated intellectuals who looked down on Mao as a peasant amateur. They wanted to fight the war the way the Bolsheviks had fought in Russia, head-on, city by city, in conventional battles. They had stripped Mao of his command and put him under house arrest on a small farm. By 1934, Mao was a non-person in his own party. When the nationalist encirclement collapsed the communist position, the surviving soldiers had no choice. They had to break out and run. Mao joined the retreat, but quietly, at first, as just another soldier. As the army marched, he started to speak up. He pointed out that the retreat was being run terribly. They were moving in a straight line, easy for the nationalists to chase. They were moving too slowly, weighed down with file cabinets and government documents and the bureaucratic furniture of a party that thought it was just relocating to a new city. Mao argued for something different. He said this should not be a temporary retreat to safer ground. It should be something much bigger. They needed to throw out the Soviet model entirely. They needed to march to the most remote mountainous part of China, a place the nationalists could not reach. They needed to leave behind everyone who wasn't truly committed. They needed to build a new kind of army. The other commanders, watching their old strategies fail in real time, slowly started to listen. They lightened the loads. They started moving at night. They feinted in different directions to throw off the chase. They held rallies in every village they passed through, recruiting peasants to their cause. And somehow, through this process, Mao went from being a disgraced exile to being the army's de facto leader. What followed became known as the Long March. It lasted a year. They crossed 24 rivers. They climbed 18 mountain ranges. They were attacked by nationalist forces, by warlords, by hostile tribes. Of the 100,000 soldiers who had started, only 6,000 reached the final destination, a remote province in the northwest called Shanxi, where the nationalists couldn't follow. By every measure, this was the worst defeat in communist history. They had lost 94% of their army. They were holed up in the most desolate corner of the country. The war should have been over. Instead, the Long March became the foundation of everything that followed. The 6,000 who survived were the most committed believers in the cause. The Soviet model had been discredited. Mao's vision of a peasant revolution had been validated. The party had been purified by the retreat, and from that remote province, over the next 15 years, Mao and his followers slowly rebuilt, and in 1949 they won. They drove Chiang Kai-shek off the mainland. They took control of all of China. The longest retreat in modern military history had become the strategic foundation for one of the most complete victories in modern military history. Now, here's the principle. Mao came from a Chinese tradition called Taoism, which has a concept that doesn't really exist in Western thinking. The concept is Wei Wu, action through inaction. The idea that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing, that sometimes retreating is not the opposite of advancing, it is a form of advancing, that sometimes the best move on the chessboard is to take your hand off the chessboard entirely. We are taught in our culture that retreat is weakness, that if someone attacks you, you must respond, that if someone takes shots at you, you must shoot back, that if you don't show up to the fight, you've already lost. But this is one of the most expensive lies we tell ourselves. Many of the fights you can be drawn into in your life, the comment wars, the office feuds, the petty grievances that demand your response, exist only because you keep responding to them. The moment you stop showing up, they die. Mao had a phrase he used to describe this. He would say, "Space, I can recover. Time, never." Translated to your life, it means this. You can lose ground in an argument and recover it later. You can lose territory in a negotiation and reclaim it later. You can let someone score a point against you and let them think they've won. None of that costs you anything, but the time you spend fighting, the hours, the weeks, the years some people spend locked in low-level conflict with people who don't deserve their attention, you never get that time back. It is the one resource you cannot replace. So when you are offered a fight that's going to drain your time, ask yourself, like Mao did, is the territory worth the days of my life I'll spend taking it back? Most of the time, the honest answer is no. You can recover space. You cannot recover time. The wise strategist trades space for time every chance she gets. Sometimes you walk away. Sometimes you don't respond to the email. Sometimes you let the rumor go uncorrected. Sometimes you let the slight stand. And while everyone else is wasting their lives fighting fights that don't matter, you are quietly using your time for the things that do. That, in the end, is how you win. Let's bring it all together. We've covered a lot of ground in the first 11 strategies. We've watched a Greek philosopher save 10,000 lives by realizing that his enemies were his greatest fuel. We've watched a samurai fight 3 impossible duels by refusing to use the same strategy twice. We've watched a one-eyed admiral win a battle his own commander tried to call off. We've watched a Spanish captain sink his own ships and conquer an empire. We've watched 20,000 men lose a war on a beach because no one was willing to give a clear order. We've watched an Austrian general lose his sanity trying to keep up with Napoleon's new style of warfare. We've watched a depressed farmer build the most disciplined army in English history out of nothing but conviction. We've watched a Greek king win every battle he fought and still die a broken man. We've watched Napoleon turn a near defeat into the greatest triumph of his life by pretending to panic. We've watched a Confederate general hold off an entire Union army by being faster than they could think. And we've watched a communist farmer turn the worst military retreat of his century into the foundation of a revolution. 11 stories. 11,000 words of history. What does it actually add up to? 5 things. Take them with you. First, your enemies are not your problem. They are your fuel. Most of us spend our lives trying to be liked by everyone, including the people who are quietly working against us. Stop. Identify the people who actually have your interests at heart and the people who don't. Don't fight the second group. Don't lecture them. Don't try to convert them. Just see them clearly and let that clarity sharpen everything you do next. The people you push against give your life direction. Without them, you drift. Second, the deepest battle you will ever fight is the one inside your own head. The version of yourself that you used to be is the most dangerous opponent you will ever face. The story you tell about your past failures, the pattern you keep replaying, the escape route you keep open just in case the new you doesn't work out. None of those things are who you are. They are who you were. And as long as you keep fighting yesterday's war, you cannot win today's. The mind that is fluid wins. The mind that is rigid loses. Be ruthless about leaving behind the version of yourself that can no longer take you where you want to go. Third, when you lead other people, your greatest enemy is your own vagueness. Hamilton lost 20,000 men on a beach because he was too polite to be clear. Mack lost his entire army because he tried to control everything from the top. The leaders who win are the ones who do two things at once. They are radically clear about what they want, and they trust the people under them to figure out how to deliver it. If you find yourself constantly frustrated with the people you lead, the answer is not to control them harder. It is to give them a real cause and a clear mission. People will move mountains for a story they believe in. They will not move an inch for a paycheck and a deadline. Fourth, most of the fights you lose by accepting them in the first place. Pyrrhus didn't lose Italy on the battlefield. He lost it years before, when he said yes to a war that was never going to be worth what it cost him. Most of the people you know who are exhausted, depleted, burnt out, they are not exhausted by the wars they lost. They are exhausted by the wars they won that they should never have fought. Before you commit to any major battle in your life, ask yourself one question. Even if I win, even if I get exactly what I'm fighting for, will the prize be worth what I had to give up to get it? If the answer isn't a clear yes, walk away. There will be other fights, and they will be the right ones. And fifth, the strongest move on the board is often the one that looks like no move at all. You don't have to win every argument. You don't have to attend every fight you're invited to. You don't have to respond to every provocation. The pushy, aggressive, emotionally reactive people in your life are revealing their weakness every time they swing at you. Let them swing. Watch what they show you. Take the time they're wasting and use it for something that actually matters. Mao traded 10,000 miles of territory for the time he needed to win all of China. You can trade an argument for the time you need to win your life. Those are the 5 lessons of part 1. Wake up to who is actually in your life. Master your own mind. Lead with clarity and meaning. Choose your battles like a king who has counted the cost, and become the kind of person no one wants to start a fight with in the first place. Greene's whole point in these first 11 strategies is that strategy doesn't start on the outside. It starts on the inside. Before you can outmaneuver anyone else in your life, you have to be able to outmaneuver yourself. Before you can lead anyone else, you have to lead the part of you that wants to give up, run away, or pick a fight with the wrong person. These are not the flashy strategies. They are not the ones that make great movie scenes, but they are the foundation. Everything that comes next in the book, the offensive strategies, the dirty strategies, the strategies that look more like what you'd expect from a book about war, all of it rests on what you've learned in these first 11. If you learn nothing else from part 1, learn this. The strategist is not the person who wins the most fights. The strategist is the person who was trained themselves to see clearly when everyone around them is reacting blindly, who can stay calm when the pressure is highest, who knows what they're fighting for, who they're fighting, and what the fight is going to cost them before they ever throw a punch. That is the foundation. Build it well, and almost nothing in your life can knock you off it. So let me leave you with this. At the very beginning of this video, I told you a story about a 30-year-old philosopher named Xenophon, alone in the dark in the middle of an enemy empire, trying to figure out how to get 10,000 men home. What that story is really about is not Persia. It is not Greece. It is not 401 B.C. It is about the moment in every person's life when the world goes quiet and you realize that nobody is coming to save you, that the army you signed up with has been beheaded, that the plan you were following has fallen apart, that the path forward is something you are going to have to invent yourself. Most people in that moment do what the Greek soldiers did. They despair, they argue, they drink, they wait for someone to fix it. A few, a very few, do what Xenophon did. They wake up, they identify the enemy, they name the fight, and they start walking. Here is the question I want you to sit with. When the moment comes in your life, and it will, when you find yourself stranded somewhere you didn't expect to be, with no one to lead you out, which kind of person are you going to be? The one who slumps to the ground and waits, or the one who declares war on the dark and starts walking? If this video was useful to you, if any of these 11 strategies hit something real in your life, Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War is one of the most underrated books I've ever read. It's a long book, it's a dense book, but every chapter is a quiet education in how to navigate the world that's actually in front of you, not the one we're told to expect. The full book is available on Amazon and Audible. Links are in the description if you want to go deeper. In part 2, we move to the next 11 strategies, the offensive strategies. How to think like a grand strategist instead of just reacting to the day. How to read the people around you the way Sun Tzu read enemy generals. How to attack at the moment your opponent least expects it. How to negotiate without giving away your power. And how to bring difficult things to a clean, decisive end, instead of letting them drag on for years. If you got something out of this one, subscribe and stick around. There's a lot more to come. Until then, be the lightning bolt in your own life. Wake up, identify the fight, and start walking. I'll see you in the next one.